He's my comfort. He always holds me close.
Stay seated. We're going to recite the 23rd Psalm as far as we are in the series so far anyways. This is our third installment on verse 4, the final one where we're talking about fear. So let's recite this together. We're going to stay standing because we're going to recite another psalm right after this. But let's say this in light of what we've heard so far. The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yes, even though I walk through the valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You know, before David wrote Psalm 23, he wrote Psalm 13. They think that he wrote Psalm 23 toward the end of his life. When he wrote Psalm 13, he was in a deep, dark place. He was being betrayed and pursued by King Saul. People were lying about him. So he left Gath, and he was so alone that he was despairing, and now David feels abandoned. And he goes to another place that's foreign to him. And he writes Psalm 13 from a cave, and it addresses feelings of despair and abandonment and loneliness and hopelessness. He's in a cave, but for David, this is one of his darkest valleys. And so let's recite together this lament from David. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemies say, I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. But I have trusted in your mercy. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. You may be seated. So as a believer, no matter your spiritual maturity, no matter how much you've tithed, no matter how much you've volunteered, it's possible to get so low that you actually feel like everyone, even God, has abandoned you. That was David's desperate condition when he wrote this psalm. And sometimes it's only from the bottom, it's only from the darkness that we learn to know what it is that God is present with us. We learn things in hard and difficult and dark places that we don't learn on joyful mountaintops. And this psalm is a beautiful expression of lament. Lament, if you're not familiar with that term, it's a faithful way to grieve. Life happens. Real feelings are real. Real hard things are really hard. And there's a way to go through those things and despair, to say, I am all alone. And there's a faithful way to go through, to cry out to God. That's what lament is. We go through dark valleys. We face incredible convulsions in our lives. So this psalm is a lament. It's a real expression of trust and hope in God. So David, toward the end of his life, can write with confidence. Remember, I've been saying he's saying something about someone. And he's saying something about his relationship to that someone. And he's actually testifying what he has found true about his shepherd. And he says this bold proclamation, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, and I've been there, I'll fear no evil, for you are with me. He's telling us something about his experience. This isn't theory. He's telling us something hard-won about his life. I shared with you last week about my experience of the presence of God in one of my dark valleys. sitting alone at Children's Hospital, face to face with 3 specialists, and they're telling me that my baby boy is going to need to have open heart surgery and there's going to be challenges ahead. That was a dark place. I didn't feel warm and cuddly by God, but I had this quiet confidence that did not come from me, that he wasn't surprised and that he was in this with me. So we're going to hear this morning a litany of testimonies from faculty and staff who have endured or are enduring various seasons in the cave, yet who have also experienced the presence of God in the midst of that cave, or soon thereafter, or a long while after. And after each one shares, my encouragement is, let's not hoot for them, let's not clap for them, but our rejoinder together after each one. Eben will lead us in proclaiming, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So Renee Henry is going to start us off this morning.
In November of 1993, I was in a nearly fatal car accident. I broke both legs and my left arm. And in the legs, it was 12 fractures in my left, 33 plus in my right, and a compound fracture in my left arm. So I was a mess, to say the least. I was 8 weeks pregnant and lost the baby. It was an extremely dark, difficult time in my life, but God was there every single moment. It was, here are some examples of what happened. I had to be wheeled in for emergency surgery, and afterwards a nurse came up to me and she said, I saw the glory of the Lord all over you. I have no idea what that looked like, but I can tell you it was a great comfort. And then another time, they had to take me to Cottage Hospital, I guess where the accident happened. It was up north. And they flew me back, and a nurse saw me being wheeled in to my room, and she said, I knew a Christian was going in that room because I saw an angel in every corner of the room. And again, I've never seen anything like that, but I can tell you once again, it was an amazing comfort to me. And then one time, I was having a hard time. If anybody's been in the hospital, the middle of the night is the worst. And the Lord just spoke to me and said, Renee, you just remember, this is just but a fleeting moment in the spectrum of eternity. And it was. It's just amazing. And then the thing I consider to be the most amazing, though, how God can use things, is that I was laying in my bed, and this nurse came up to me, and he said, do you think God will do for me what he's done for you? And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I'm a mess. But he said that he needed prayer for migraine headaches. And so I thought, I've got one good arm. So I laid my hand on his head and I prayed for him. And he obviously saw something again that I did not see. He saw God working through me, and as you can see now, I don't have a lot of issues. And one thing I can say is that when times may be tough, even to the point of when we don't think we can make it, but God is with us wherever we go. Those dark times grow us. They show us that God is reliable, compassionate, and extremely loving. I'd never felt the love of God like I did through then. And he meets us right where we are and through our weaknesses at that time.
Respond with me. Yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
The most frightening decision I ever had to make was to move to California to take this job at Westmont. For the first 30 years of my life, I had lived within a very tight, some might say even inbred, ethnic religious subculture based in Western Michigan. This subculture governed my family, my friends, my church, most of the schools I attended, and certainly my sense of where I would end up carrying out my vocation as a college professor. This may sound oppressive to you, but it was not oppressive to me. It was beautiful and meaningful and tremendously comforting. But then I ended up on the job market, and I ended up with a difficult choice. A short-term job that would allow me to stay close to my family and my friends and all that was known and beloved, or take a long-term position 2,259 miles away in California. I'd never in a million years imagined living so far away from everything I held dear and from my beloved Lake Michigan, much less living in California. In my heart of hearts, I knew that I should not take the safe, familiar path, even as I was terrified of moving across the country on my own. What I discovered, however, in following what I think of as God's call to teach at a Christian college is that the Holy Spirit will sustain us in ways I had been unable to even imagine. And in fact, I was never alone. Trusting that the scary choice was the right choice opened the door to teach me to rely on God's provision and God's presence, and has also allowed me the great joy and privilege of working with students like you.
And we respond by saying, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
My husband has dementia. For us, each day brings new challenges. Some are harder than others. A couple of Saturdays ago, our daughter Meredith came home for the weekend. Mary was helping her dad write a message on a birthday card for our other daughter, Megan. To most, this is a simple thing, but not for him. From the other room, I heard him thank Mary for helping him. It was sincere, genuine, and honest. Listening to their exchange, I was struck with such an overwhelming feeling of gratefulness for this kind and gentle man. I stopped what I was doing, looked up, and praised God for the gift of my husband. Every morning, my husband starts our prayer time off with these words: "This is the day that the Lord has made. We shall rejoice and be glad in it." Our journey is not easy, but we are not alone. The Lord is our shepherd, and we rejoice and are glad in it.
And we give glory to God by saying, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
So about 15 years ago, I was spiritually dead in the water, and to carry on the sailing metaphor, there was no wind in my sails, nor could I feel even the slightest sense of God's breeze across my face. The ship that was my faith was motionless. Now, by all external accounts, my life was rocking. I had a wonderful wife, 3 young sons, a home, a great job. And I was doing all of the things you're supposed to do to nurture your faith. Plugged into church, home group leader, men's retreat speaker, praying and reading, and yet could not feel God's presence in my life. Zero, nada, zip, zilch. And it went on like that for months. It was as though my faith had completely flatlined. So, like every despondent person in search of a happy ending, I turned to the most happy-go-lucky book in all of Scripture, the book of Job. And it was a few verses in chapter 23, and to use another metaphor, that were the spiritual 2x4 to my head, my heart, and my soul, and they helped me reframe how I perceive my circumstance. And here's Job 23, 8 through 10. But if I go to the east, he is not there. If I go to the west, I do not find him. When he's at work in the north, I do not see him. When he turns to the south, I catch no glimpse of him. And this was the verse that saved my bacon. But he knows the way I take. He knows the path I take. He knows the path you take. The first couple verses acknowledge my sense of abandonment, and yet the final verse let me rest in the knowledge and assurance that in spite of what I was unable to feel, the creator of the universe, the Alpha, the Omega, knew the path that I was on, and he knows your path.
Respond. Yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
They didn't want me to worry, so they didn't tell me about it until I came home after my first year in college. It was something many of you may be facing now, a serious health issue for one of your parents. My mother had been diagnosed with an incurable degenerative neurological disease. It was easy to ignore at first, but by the time I had entered graduate school, her condition was quite serious. Every break we had, I'd fly home to help care for her. It was exhausting work. And watching the decline of such a good woman just didn't seem fair. Eventually, she couldn't feed herself, dress herself, shower, or even use the toilet on her own. I remember crying out in my prayers, God, it's such a simple thing for you to cure her. Why don't you? Why don't you? He didn't. But gradually I noticed something. It was a change in my family, specifically in my father. He was always a good man, but not particularly religious. When faced with a crisis like this, he could have chosen one of two paths, to walk away from God or walk towards God. He chose the latter. And in so doing, our family was drawn closer together. Many years later, and after my mother had died, our family faced another health crisis, this time with my father. But I was more along in the faith by then, and drawing on God's past faithfulness enabled my prayers to be different. Of course, I prayed for a cure, but I also prayed that God would work through this crisis to change my brother and me in the ways that he wanted us to change. And I prayed the same prayer 10 years ago when my brother had an unexpected stroke. And then just this past summer when he died after choking in a nursing home. I haven't quite figured out God's hand in that yet, but I'm confident that I will. Fellow learners, when you are going through a tough time, my prayer is that you too will be able to take confidence that someday you will be able to look back at God's faithfulness to you. Such faithfulness might not now be evident. If it's not, perhaps the words from the hymn, "Give to the winds thy fears," will comfort you as they have me. Far, far above thy thought, his counsel shall appear, when fully he the work hath wrought, that caused thy needless fear.
We respond, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
10 years ago, my wife Sharon and I lost our faculty home in the Tea Fire. Now, losing one's home in a fire has become an increasingly common experience in California, and I thought that I could weather this. We spent the fire here in the gym, my wife as a nurse caring for the hundreds of students sheltering here, I in the men's locker room caring for 4 dogs. I snuck out from time to time, walked out by the weight room, and I could see a river of flame down the Bronca and white-hot balls of fire that were our faculty homes. Later in the evening, when the winds died down, I walked back to the faculty neighborhood with another professor, Maurice Lee, and when I saw our home, which was essentially gone, I literally collapsed on his shoulder. I'd never had an experience like that before. Maurice was literally propping me up, and I felt a twist in my gut that did not go away for a couple of years, actually. What marked the next few months was a role reversal, and instead of being a faculty member caring for my students were the ones caring for me. I think of Britta, who had recently graduated, organized a book drive among alumni and showed up on our porch at our rented condo with boxes and boxes of donated books. I think of Kristen in a poetry tutorial who checked in with me every week, wanting to know how I was doing. I came to chapel often in those months just to hear the sound of our campus pastor's voice. I would sit quietly afterwards over in the stands there listening to the band play. And I think of my student Rita, who saw me there and would come and quietly sit beside me, not speaking, just being present with me. I preach community in my classes, but I often practice self-reliance. But the fire was a time when you all, faculty and students, but especially students, propped me up.
We respond, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Right now, I am walking through a valley of death. Multiple deaths are currently happening in my life, and this morning I want to share with you about one of them. In September, my husband and I got the exciting news that our second child was on the way. We were overjoyed. Our excitement was crushed in November when we found out our baby has a rare condition that makes it impossible to live outside of the womb. Since then, we have been living in grief, anticipating death instead of life. I am daily living with a sorrow that cannot be consoled. Many people have been praying for us during this season, and one prayer is that I will feel a special closeness to God in the midst of my pain. I haven't had that experience. I do have a constant, tearful conversation running with God, yet I don't feel warmth or his closeness. Life is just really hard. For those of you in the midst of grief, or all of you, because you will experience it in life, if you encounter sweet intimacy with Jesus in the midst of your darkest valley, that is a beautiful gift. To those of us who don't have that experience of special closeness, it doesn't mean that God has forsaken us or that we've done something wrong. Honestly, I can't tell you what it means. Sometimes there's just great pain. I do know that in the midst of pain, God still is. God is still loving. God is still with you. God is still on the throne. I want to close with a paraphrase from Psalm 42 that captures my past few months. What's going on? Why am I so upset? Why am I so disturbed? Why can't I just hope in God? Despite this flood of emotions, I'll believe and praise you, the one who saves me, who is my very life.
We respond, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
So to follow Christ is not to be romantic about suffering. But at some point, Paul can say, death, where is your sting? Because it's not the final story. The very thing we fear the most is not the end of the story. And we've been proclaiming together that I will fear no evil, for you are with me. But that is different, as you heard from Rebecca and from some others, that is different than saying that I always will experience you with me. And you need to hear that so that you're not shocked when you go through that experience. Oftentimes, my brothers and sisters, you see that he is with you in the rearview mirror. It's only later that you look back and see that he was with you sometimes. And that is faith. And that is real faith. Remember, we've been talking about fear, that it's the projection that though God has been with you and though God is with you now, that somehow he's not going to be with you when X, Y, or Z happens. That's what fear does, and it robs us now. So we don't have to live in fear because we do have a God who is with us. I'll close here that my junior year at Westmont was fairly miserable. I was the RA of my friends. Never do that. The girl that I swore I was going to marry broke up with me. My grandmother died, my sweet Nana, and then my dog died, and I was like, I'm out. This is it. And in that time, I did two things. I would beat the living crud out of my mattress with a wiffle ball bat as I listened to Phil Collins' I Don't Care Anymore. I recommend it. And God gave me this passage that has been an anchor for me for the rest of my life. And I lend it to you. Write this one on your heart. As for me, the nearness of God is my good. That's how I define good. The nearness of God. Circumstances may be all over the map, but the nearness of God is my good. And I've made the Lord God my refuge, that I may tell of all of his wonderful works. We follow a God who is incarnated in our midst. That's how Jesus is known, Emmanuel, God with us. So we can proclaim, sometimes timidly, sometimes boldly, yes, even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Thank you.